Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be looking at Docker. So we'll look at what is Docker all about, right? So Docker is a software platform that allows developers to create, test and deploy applications using containers. Containers are standardized units that package an application code, dependency, and libraries into a single unit. So Docker is a container management service. Docker was released in 2013. It is open source and available for different platforms like Windows, Mac, and Linux. Docker is weekly shaping, testing, and deploying code. So Docker helps in testing and deploying code, right? So now, because I believe that why people find it hard to understand Docker is because they don't have the knowledge why Docker exists. They don't know the reason behind Docker existence. So today I will give a simple analogy which shows the importance of Docker. So let's say now we have a server of 30 gig RAM and 1 terabyte of SSD. This is just a random figure that I'm using. Now, and an e-commerce is deployed on this server, right, for the public to use. Then there was an update. There was a feature that was created by a developer. Let's say the payment feature of the e-commerce has been developed and pushed to production. Another software developer develops another feature for this e-commerce, which is the cart section, right? And also push this to production. Now, if these two features have different versions, there will be conflicts on the server, which will make the production break, and that is bad for business. Now they decided to look at how can we solve this issue, because this made deployment to server or to production take longer time, because after deployment most times there is issue, and to resolve this issue will take days or weeks. So now they started to start looking for a way to solve this problem. So the first thing was to create virtual machines. Um, so to create virtual machines. So what is a virtual machine? So a virtual machine is creating a server inside another server. When say something is virtual, it means that you cannot touch or you cannot feel it, but you can see it, right? So creating a virtual machine is just creating another server inside a server, right? So if you don't know what a virtual machine is and you want to go in depth of what a virtual machine is, I have done a video on virtual machine which I will put in the description below. So after watching this video, you can check it out. So now they decided to create virtual machines, right? So now we had 30 gigabytes of RAM and 1 terabyte of SSD. So now this server can be split into two, or you can split it anyhow you want. But for this server, I decided to split it into two. one 15 gig of RAM. The second one is 15 gig of RAM as well, and 500 SSD for each server, both the virtual and the physical server, right? So now, so the first software developer can deploy to one of the servers, while the second developer can now deploy um, his application to the second server or second virtual machine, right? So this solved the issue of what conflict between two applications with different dependencies or different version. But there is another issue that came with this, right? And the issue is that since the resources of the server is shared, like the RAM and the hard disk, since it's shared, the server became slower, right? It became slower, and this led to further research of how can we make things faster, how can we make the server faster, and this led to the discovery of Docker, right? So now for Docker, the server resources will not be shared because Docker runs on top of the operating system. So you can see the architecture of how Docker is. So you can see the first one here is the infrastructure, which is the system or the server. The second one is the operating system, that's the hosting operating system, which can be Linux, it can be Windows or Mac. And the next one, which is the Docker, right? The Docker runtime, right? So inside the Docker, we have what we call the containers, and these containers is what will run the application. So the container creates the environment where the application will run, right? So the next one is, what are the benefits of using Docker? So the first one is portability and consistency. So what this means is that sometimes your application will be running on your local host, that's on your local system. But once you move it to the server or to production, it will stop working. So Docker help in solving this problem, in the sense that once it's running on your system, even if you deploy it on the production, it will still run without issues. Then the second one is like it's lightweight and efficient, unlike virtual machine, which where unlike virtual machine where the server resources is shared. Docker is lightweight and what efficient. The other one is scalability and microservice support. It's scalable. It helps in making scalability easier, and that, I think that is one of the major reasons of Docker um, adaptability. That is major reason why Docker was adopted, because of microservice and scalability. Then it aids in what faster deployment, because if it runs on your local host, it will be easier to deploy it on the server, because once it's run on your local host, it will also run on the production or staging, right? So it saves time in development. So because as you are developing, you are testing and you are deploying, so it saves a lot of time. Let's look at let's look at Docker components. Right. So the first one is the Docker engine. So Docker engine is runtime referred to the environment where Docker containers are executed. So it's essentially the components responsible for creating, running, and managing containers on a host system. So Docker runtime manages how containers are launched, their resource limits, and their interaction with the underlying system or the host machine. So the second one is Docker registry. So Docker registry is an image registry. So Docker registry is a central location for storing and sharing Docker images. It can be either public or private. Docker Hub is a public registry that anyone can use and is the default registry, right? So it can be public or private. Public means that anyone can upload their image to the Docker registry, or example is what the Docker Hub. It's just like GitHub or GitLab that is open to every developer, so every developer can push their code to Docker, to GitHub or GitLab. So in this case, it's a central location where images are being stored. So anybody can push their images to Docker Hub, which is a public repository. But most organizations have registries that are private because you wouldn't want to expose your images to the public. So most companies use private registry. So the next one is Docker images. So Docker images are essential blueprint or template for creating Docker containers. An image contains everything needed to run an application. So Docker images is a blueprint or template that describes how a container should be created. And a container contains everything, all the dependencies that is required to run a particular application. So the next one is Docker container. The running instances of Docker images. So while Docker images are static and act as the blueprint, containers are the live environment where application run. So the next one is Docker file. So Docker file is a script that contains a series of instructions on how to build a Docker image. It specifies the environment and configuration for Docker container, detailing everything from the base image to the commands that run when the container is created. So this means that Docker is a file, right, that shows the process of how um, a Docker container should run, right? So we will look into that later in this video, how to create a Docker file. We'll look into Docker images when we start doing the demo, right? So the next thing is Docker networking. So let's look at the networking aspect of Docker. So what is Docker networking? So networking or Docker network allows containers to communicate with each other or the host machine. So it allows containers to communicate. For example, you have a container running React.js, which is the front end, and another container running like Node.js, which is the back end. So they need to communicate with each other. So, and Docker network allows the communication of these two containers. So let's look at types of Docker network. So the first one is the bridge network, and this is the default network. So, the bridge network is a private network on the host that contains that container can con. So a private network on the host that containers can connect to by its name, right? So you can connect to the network by using the name, right? So we'll look at all these things in the practical section of this video. So the next one is the host network. So the host network, um, so its isolation is removed and network is attached directly to the host. The next one is overlay network. So basically, overlay network is usually used in Docker Swarm, where um, different container communicates across multiple hosts. So the next one is non-network. So this disables the network for that particular container. So let's look at Docker volumes. So what is Docker volume? So Docker volume persists data beyond container lifecycle, making them essential for database application with stateful data, right? So what this means is that Docker containers are ephemeral. That means it have a very short lifespan, right? So now, if you are storing your information inside a container, um, any small thing that happens, the container will die or it will restart. And what this means is that all the data that you have saved inside that Docker container will be erased. So that is why we need Docker volume to persist data, so that even if the container dies, then I restarts, the data will still be there, except you intentionally delete the volume or the data. So that is the importance of Docker volume. So let's look at types of Docker volume. So the first one is the named volume. So named volume stores in Docker managed location on the host. So we will look at the practical section of this, what we will be doing the demo. So the second one is big mount. So big mount binds a specific directory on the host to the container. Then the next one is the anonymous volume. So anonymous volume or unnamed volume is a Docker image often used temporarily. So Docker uses this anonymous volume temporarily. So once you create maybe a Docker container, it creates a temporal Docker volumes, and these volumes are the names of this volume is maybe a random string or a random generated name, right?